You're all most welcome. Just to note that the meeting is being recorded. A notice most probably has just flashed up on your screens saying that the recording has started. We just use this to help write the minutes and record what's been going on. So, and then if you want to ask a question, either raise your hand or if you just want to chat, then the chat function is also available. So both of those, please feel free to use during the course of the meeting. So, without further ado, over to Daniel for changes to the board of directors. Oh, one thing, can I just ask people to go on mute unless you're speaking? That'd be great, just to keep down extraneous noise. So, Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Just as a way of introduction, really, just since the last strategic advisory group, we've had some new members join our board and also some new standard members, which I've kind of listed toward the bottom. I don't know if any of our new members have joined us this morning, but we launched an open call for new non-executive board directors back in May. Really successful exercise, and following that we made 2 appointments. So Catherine McKenzie from the Upper and Bedford Ouse Catchment Partnership and the Revival Association joined us as our second stakeholder director. And Paul Mumford, representing Urban and Civic, has joined us as a new principal funding director. We've also had Giles Bloomfield join our board to represent IDBs across the region on behalf of the Association of Drainage Authorities. And many people will know Giles, I'm sure, from the Water Management Alliance. But just to kind of touch on some of our membership, as I said, overall we've got more than 180 members, edging towards 200 now, and a really interesting mix. Within those joining recently, telemetry companies, kind of remote sensing into kind of technology. Daveney Limited, who run the Barnum Broom Golf and Spa, but very interested in kind of water management from a non-household perspective. Dries and Design Action Group. And 2 new members from the new appointment and variation sector, so the NAV companies that build water networks for new development. So both the Independent Water Networks, which is the largest NAV company in the country, and the Independent Networks Association, which is the kind of trade body which represents independent gas, energy and water networks. And one of the things we're kind of trying to build into our final regional plan is more of a discussion about the role of NAVs in helping to reduce demand within new development and support kind of regional water resource planning. That's all I was going to say about those, but welcome all of them. And obviously, hopefully someone joined today, and obviously we'll be receiving newsletters and so forth in future months.
Thank you. So, update on the final regional water resources plan. So is Ben, yes, Ben, leading off
thanks very much, Paul.
Please. Thanks, Ben.
Right, if you just stick on this slide for a moment, Daniel. So just by way of understand where we are in the timeline, many of you will be aware of the fact that we released our consultation around a year ago, and our response to that consultation came out earlier in the summer, detailing a number of key changes that have been made, and you'll see some of those reflected in the slides that I'll go through in a moment. Between the summer and now, we've been working really hard with, in particular, the water company members of WRE to make sure that we continue to reaffirm our choices of low regret options, the strategic resource options in the longer term plan, and supported that alignment and the submission of the water company revised draft water resource management plans to the Environment Agency for review. So those revised draft WRMPs are currently sat with the Environment Agency, awaiting their kind of final line to DEFRA to advise whether they can be published or whether amendments are needed. But from Water Resources East perspective, our plan remains non-statutory, and we're taking the leap from draft to final later in the year with publication ahead of Christmas. Now, one thing to say, and we'll come on to this in a few slides' time, is that to de-risk our plan publication, development of final plan, that the key thing for us is to make sure that it's adaptive, and that it's not dependent on small changes that might get made to any one company's plan following that EA and DEFRA review. So we're still fully committed to publishing ahead of Christmas and moving into delivery and monitoring phase in 2024. So if you move on to the next slide, what I'm going to do is just take you through a couple of slides that set the scene and a couple of key updates that have been made since the draft plan, some numbers and some technical work that's gone behind them, without going into too much detail. For anyone who wants to ask me lots of more detailed questions, you can always put your hand up and ask, or I'm happy to kind of follow up with conversations subsequently. But one of the things that the final plan will be associated with is, of course, all of the supporting documentation that you saw before, updated following some work over the summer in particular, and an additional supporting document that takes through in a more complete process how the plan has come together and the way in which we've made our decisions that culminate in the slides that you see here. So an image that's familiar from the draft plan, just setting out the scale of projected demand in 2025 and how that might forecast out towards 2050. The headline from this slide, really, there's a number. On average, our average daily water consumption, public water supply still dominates. However, the messages from the draft plan still hold that in any given catchment or any given peak summer hot week, these balances could shift around, with irrigation of crops potentially representing the largest demand in some catchments on certain days. But when we look at the way in which those demands might change in the future, the image here is characterized by uncertainty, really, and that's expressed with those kind of error bars, those black dotted lines. And for public water supply, really, the uncertainty here that's captured is around population growth. We can use the best forecasts, and that's what we based our plan around. But this reflects how that growth in demand for water supply, including non-household, might change from anywhere between an additional 20 to an extra 243 MLD by 2050. And we carry out a number of stress tests and model runs to make sure that the plan can still adapt and is robust to those. But we focus on a core pathway whereby future demand increases in the range of 173 MLD over the planning period. For agricultural use, the uncertainty is much bigger. And this is because this has a lot of other market forces, economic pressures, choices that the individual businesses, groups, farmers might make around irrigation practices, the crops they grow, the way in which licenses are constrained. But overall, this represents a massive uncertainty for the region, and it's one that where later on in this session today, you'll hear about work that's underway to improve the capacity of the agricultural sector to plan for water resources and develop sources of new water that are appropriate to the scale of their planning challenge. And as you go over to the right of this diagram, you see other relatively smaller currently sources of or demands on our freshwater resources with equally uncertain futures. So this is all work that we've been busy remaining engaged with the agriculture, in particular the energy sector, over the last 6 months to a year through different work streams, and we're tracking those closely so that once this plan is published in December, we can move straight ahead into the next round of planning almost, and then really start to join up our planning and come up with a more holistic regional plan. Drop onto the next slide, Daniel. So if that's the increase in demand, this just now focusing on public water supply, not the other sectors now. If that's the change in demand that we're expecting, which is effectively represented by that blue line on the top of this, what you can see here is that with the orange line representing the water available for use, the water available to supply that public water supply demand dropping off, we end up with a gap. And so this is a kind of reflection of that jaws of death diagram that we've seen in the draft plan, and lots of people have shown at different scales. But the key points to just pick up on here, with blue line at the top representing that growing potential public water supply demand led by population growth primarily. The grey line represents where we hope we can retain that demand too. So this is a result of government-led interventions around water good labelling. This depends on achieving advanced ambitions on leakage management and demand management, smart metering rollouts. And so what you see is that actually demand management and leakage reduction really take off quite a large chunk of the planning problem, the size of that gap between the demand and the supply side at the right-hand side of the chart. But as water available for use drops off for a number of drivers, license caps to protect habitats, potential early delivery of advanced destination improvements, achieving drought resilience, and then obviously a slow burn of climate change through the planning period. This is where the new supply options are needed to resolve the remaining deficit. And if you drop on to the next slide, Daniel. The demand side targets are where we've really seen the biggest shift, I think, since the draft plan. So since the draft plan, there's been a number of new targets, different plan for water amongst others, capturing overall ambitions for reducing distribution input the water put into the supply network. And I just want to, I'll leave this up here so you can kind of look at it for a couple of minutes, but just to reflect on a couple of headlines for the region. On a per capita consumption basis, we still remain committed across the water company members to driving down demand to an average of 110 litres per person per day, in line with targets. The biggest shift for us is around leakage reduction, which for the draft plan averaged out approximately 29% reduction in leakage against baseline levels. That's now shifted in a positive direction to something closer to 40% reduction in leakage. And now that's going to be incredibly challenging, and that's a real step forward for the water company members in our region who are already at the frontier of leakage control. But that actually delivers a fairly sizable improvement in the future demand picture. Thanks, Daniel. I can see you're highlighting some of those numbers. Now, the one that's really caused some most interesting discussion recently is around the non-household demand on the sort of second group down. And what we're seeing here is that this is something that as a WRE as a whole, we're keen to kind of explore in more detail as we move forward, regarding the fact that there is growth in the region, there is an ambition for growth, and that's associated with economic growth as well, and non-household use, so that's business users that depend on the public water supply network, are constantly requesting new sources of water from our public water supply companies. And in many cases, those additional demands go above and beyond what might have been reflected in local authority plans that forecasts have been based on. And so actually, we're already seeing in our region a struggle from our water companies to be able to meet those demands. Household demands have to be met. The water companies have a duty to do that. But from a non-household demand perspective, we're really dependent on some key new supply options coming into place, or they can't be met in the short term. Now, just by way of a quick word, there's some red numbers in there, and so what we're facing here is that where there's already been significant non-household growth in the region since the baseline period was delineated, and that those numbers continue to increase. What we're currently seeing is for Anglian Water and for Cambridge Water, the reductions in non-household demand are actually going to be currently listed against relative reductions. So whatever the forecast number would have been in 2050, it's a relative reduction from that amount, rather than reducing existing demand that's already being placed on the network. And so this is something we're really trying to work through WRE, where we're having constant discussions and water company members with potential new demands, so the energy sector in particular in different industries, and trying to get a better handle on how we can plan for those unknown unknowns, I think, is how this is going to be captured, and where we need to try and promote capacity building and extra supplies to meet those demands where they have significant economic benefits to the region. Okay. On the next slide, so if that's focus on demand, taking off a big chunk, I think the numbers around, including government interventions, around 330 MLD reduction across off the baseline demand, with the rest needing to be picked up by supply options. One of the things that came out of our consultation was the question, are there enough supply options to meet the range in deficits that are left to supply options to pick up? The answer is yes, and this is a brief summary indicating the range of options we have across different option types. And when you compare that against the remaining deficit for supply options, which is in the region of 400 megalitres per day, what we see is that if you added up all of our mutually exclusive options, so I've excluded size variance and different options that just physically or environmentally couldn't take place together for currently known reasons, you actually see that the sum total of those options is 3.5 plus times the size of the deficit. So what that allows us to do is to pick and choose the best portfolios that offer the best value for the future and for the region, whilst also retaining the ability to scale up and adapt should the situation worsen in the future through lower demand management outcomes or different pathways around adaptive pathways for environmental destination, which we'll touch on in a few slides time. And I just wanted to briefly touch on one of the more significant changes since the draft plan is the inclusion of a what I think we can see as an interregional solution, whereby Cambridge Water's short to medium term needs in the early 2030s have an opportunity to be supported via a virtual trade with Affinity Water and Cambridge Water. So in the early 2030s, the Grand Union Canal option associated with the Minworth reuse scheme, which is another strategic resource option going through Ofwat's a rapids accelerated gated process. That water coming down into Affinity has the possibility of reducing Affinity Water's dependency on Anglian Water, which in turn allows Anglian Water to supply Cambridge Water with some additional supplies ahead of the Fens Reservoir coming into play. And so that's going to hopefully, and we've seen in our modelling, provide Cambridge Water with a really nice buffer while the Fens Reservoir is still in development, because it remains the case that the Fens Reservoir is very much at the core of the plan, but it cannot be delivered earlier than 2036. So that's a really kind of key piece of the puzzle for us as a region. Okay, if we go on to the next slide. So how that all pans out is the map on the right hand side is showing how that best value plan all shapes up by 2050. So the overarching narrative here is that underpinned by demand management and leakage reduction in the early part of the plan and right the way through, more or less offsetting future population growth, is backed up by early delivery of advanced infrastructure schemes, which include transfer schemes, for example, for Essex and Suffolk, and a number of non-advanced infrastructure schemes, but nonetheless really, really critical schemes that feature in Anglian Water's business plan. It's recently been released for AMP8. That's allowing us to already share existing surpluses and existing reserves of water around the region. And those get backed up in the early 2030s by a number of smaller company options and the Grand Union Canal supported virtual trade for Cambridge Water. Building on top of that, a number of reuse schemes. And then after that is where we see those really key two reservoirs, the Fens Reservoir in 2036 and the Lincolnshire Reservoir from 2040. And what you then see later in the plan is a need for a number of desalination plants. And the key change, most obviously from this map compared to the draft plan map, would be the loss of or the removal of one desalination plant from the core pathway. And that's really, I think Felixstowe was the named desalination plant in the draft plan. And that's really reflecting the additional demand management ambition. So as a result of demand management, actually our core pathway is seen to not need the additional desalination capacity. And if you slide on to the next one, what I've just done, just picked out the numbers. So there you can see demand management fulfilling 333 MLD of the overall deficit by 2050, and with reservoirs picking up the next highest chunk at 280 MLD. And you can see there the big shift in that desalination box, where desalination previously was listed at 145 MLD capacity and now dropped down to 110. And you can see with the other smaller company options at 75, with an increase from 34, and that's representing this commitment from the companies, the water companies, to those early advanced infrastructure delivery schemes, the importance of those smaller company schemes in filling the gap and deferring the need for desalination and more costly and more environmentally risky options later on down the plan. So if that's the best value plan, solving our core pathway, what we've been careful to do in the run up to this final plan development is really to look at how the plan can adapt and how it can perform under different stress tests. So what if the core pathway isn't the one that ends up transpiring? Now, a word of just note that we've been quite careful not to duplicate the work and confuse the work of the water companies. So we've left detailed company level adaptive pathway and scenario analysis to the water companies, and that will include the Ofwat common reference scenarios that the companies are required to do. From a regional perspective, we focused our attention on the bigger picture, and one of the biggest responsibilities for the regional groups is to help refine our understanding of the environmental destination, those potential abstraction reductions to deliver against the needs of the water dependent environment, starting with Water Framework Directive, moving on to chalk streams, national and internationally designated sites, including wetlands and SSSI rivers. So what I'll show you briefly on the subsequent slides is really that how the plan can shape and adapt to those bigger picture items. Okay, so this is a schematic that kind of illustrates the 4 key adaptive pathways we've been assessing at a regional level. So what you can see here is that with on the y-axis, schematically speaking, at least, is the size of the deficit to be resolved. And as we pass through the different time slices, you can see that the most obvious divergence in our pathways comes in 2040, where there's currently a trigger for the shift between environment destination pathways. So our core pathway, denoted by the red line there, is solving that BAU plus resilience and restore the resilience BAU plus environment destination scenario with all of our core assumptions around water efficiency, demand management, the inclusion of government-led interventions. That's where we think our pathway will go, and that pathway aligns with the other regions that's allowed us to play a consistent view across the regional reconciliation. But if we step up to the blue and the grey lines, the grey line, what we see is that's the scale of the jump in the deficit. If we jump to the more ambitious and arguably at this point uncertain enhanced environment destination scenario. Now, we are still keen to commit to the environmental outcomes associated with the enhanced environment destination scenario, but in a moment I'll show you the trade-offs and the reasons why we need to be cautious about exactly how much abstraction reduction needs to take place and exactly how we deliver that scenario. Now, the other thing to say is that whilst the 2040 point here is the divergence and therefore represents the trigger point for the shift in the deficit, our decision point for shifting to that is actually way back in 2030, at the end of AMP8, by which time we will have carried out a number of investigations on a multi-sector basis, is the plan, to refine our understanding of how those environmental destination scenarios actually look. And that gap between 2030 and 2040 is because of the time needed to shift focus and accelerate or increase the capacity of certain supply schemes, be it reuse or desal. The other key pathway we've been exploring is the adapting to a lower expect or a higher demand future effectively. This is what if demand management and leakage reduction doesn't quite pan out as we expect. So we invest the same, but it doesn't quite pan out. And that's reflected by that blue line. Just you can see it's just starts to diverge from the other pathways from 2030. And with that actually causing a slight divergence so soon, actually our decision point for that really comes right near the end of the 2020s. So there's a real need to focus on an annual basis on how demand is panning out, how metering strategies are actually influencing demand and behavior, and whether we actually need to accelerate a number of schemes. And I'll show you a slide to illustrate that in just a moment. So this is our key adaptive pathway, and this is what de-risks the plan for the future. Go on to the next slide, Daniel. So I talked about the trade-offs in cost. So yeah, while we definitely want chalk streams to be improved, triple SI rivers to meet the targets they need, our wetlands to deliver the environmental habitat that they ought to be providing. This chart is just one of the trade-offs that illustrates why we absolutely need to refine our understanding of the best catchment way, multi-sector way of delivering those improvements. You can see that here over the course of the plan, once you get towards the end, there is actually quite a big divergence in the cost curves. Now, from the beginning of the planning period in 2025 to 2040, the plans remain the same. And we've said that since the draft plan. This is about fixing our core pathway from which we can adapt, from which we can scale up where it's appropriate to do so. But it always bases itself on some fixed decisions we need to make now because the reservoirs take a certain number of years to develop, because those reuse schemes in the early 2030s we need to get cracking on those now. And so what we see here is that investment early on in the planning period is common to all scenarios, and that's delivering in the early part against population growth. That's through demand, that's through delivering new supplies to support this new non-household demand. And it's also about new supplies that are needed to offset license caps that are preventing deterioration in the environment under the Water Framework Directive. And those are kind of the must-dos of the plan, irrespective of the pathway we choose. By the mid-2030s, the investment we're seeing actually supports that drought resilience, the delivery of the 1 in 500 drought resilience standard. And also where we've identified the possibility that certain supply schemes can unlock the possibility of early environmental destination cuts in priority catchments, we've done that. And so that by 2040, we're already starting to chip away at the longer term environmental destination problem, not just the kind of statutory no deterioration one. But then it's after 2040, and I've kind of illustrated that with that bracket on the right hand side. You start to see the marginal difference in cost as you shift from BAU to BAU plus to the enhanced environmental destination. So it's those costs which actually sum up right now to several £billion by the end of the planning period that we really need to focus on carefully and understand where are those environmental improvements really needed and what are the supply schemes and the actions that we really need to take to deliver that. And that's a reflection of the fact that the enhanced environmental destination, yes, while it includes all of those great environmental outcomes, it does have uncertainty. So that's something we absolutely need to resolve over the coming 5 years. And this is just one other slide almost to wrap that ED, environmental destination adaptive pathways piece up. What we can see is that by currently focusing on the BAU plus core pathway and fixing those must-do schemes for AMP8 and into the early 2030s, what we actually see is an ability to defer the more environmentally risky and potentially energy-intensive supplies. And the chart here on the right-hand side is an excerpt from the report that you'll see in December alongside the plan that illustrates our decision-making process. And what you see here is that when we compare certain best value metrics, in this case, strategic environmental assessment scores, operational carbon and total expenditure, what you see is that the enhanced one on the left there, the plan that adapts to enhance, hangs well below the axis of performance. So it performs worse for cost, it's more expensive, but it offers the possibility that it needs a lot more operational carbon, and in developing new, bigger, additional supply schemes, you bring in your own environmental risks. And so these are the things that we need to work through over the next few years to understand where and how we actually deliver these environmental improvements that we all want. Okay, next slide. And then just to conclude on the adaptive pathways piece, if the above has been around adapting to different environmental outcomes, but still assuming the same outcome on demand management leakage, we need to understand that those demand management pathways actually come with a lot of uncertainty. Depends on government interventions, it depends on behaviours. These are things that can't necessarily be controlled by the water companies or by WRE. So as we start to see from late AMP8 in the late 2020s a potential increase in the size of the deficit, there's a number of decisions we need to make. The headlines are captured here, broadly represented by a need to accelerate development and potentially increase the capacity of some of those desalination plants. So if we've kind of really sat those two reservoir schemes in demand management at the core of the plan, it's in the other schemes that can be scaled up or down in a more dynamic fashion that come in later in the planning period that need to be adjusted. So we see those three desalination plants that are named in the best value plan, Holland-on-Sea, Batson desalination, and the Mablethorpe, potentially either accelerating or increasing. But we also see something that we might need to look, maybe that Felixstowe desal might need to come back into the mix. But that's something that can come later in the planning period. The other thing to just quickly pause on is the fact that if demand management isn't quite as successful as planned, there is actually going to be a number of trade-offs, not only in the need for new supplies, but also to adjust potentially the timing at which certain license caps and license reductions can take place. So we're already starting to see that for a couple of companies, we may need to just push back by a few years the ability to cap licenses. Otherwise, we'll end up with a deficit, which the companies in their statutory planning processes cannot do. But these schemes with those lead times really illustrates why the decision point isn't always the same as that trigger point. The decisions need to be made soon, and that's why we're really happy that we've been instructed that regional plans need to be tracked and monitored on a 6-monthly or an annual basis after the plan's publication, so we can really keep an eye and see when these decisions actually have to be made. This is my final slide. So one thing that we took on board following the consultation and through a number of meetings we've had within WRE is the fact that we need to just really make sure we're evidencing a lot of these key changes. And what the board of WRE did was they wrote to our member water companies and asked for additional evidence and additional reassurance that a number of the things that really sit in their camp for resolving have been evidence from their side and have genuinely improved our ability to justify that our plan is best value at a regional level. So I won't read all of these, but what you can see here is that in the letters that the water company sent back to us just around a month ago, they've been able to demonstrate for us and reassure us that they truly have, for example, exhausted the potential for new cost-effective supply side options. They have actually looked at the most ambitious demand side actions that they can. And that's all carried through into allowing us to understand that the environmental improvements and the way in which the strategies for resolving the deficit come through genuinely are as hard as we can go for now, based on the uncertainty and based on the cost effectiveness question. Daniel, I can see a hand up,
Tim,
but I don't know who it
Tim
is.
has a question. So, Tim, do you want to ask a question now?
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, actually. First of all, listening to, and thank you, Ben, for a fantastic presentation, first of all. But you talked about modelling agriculture and looking at agriculture's need. Can I just ask what model you're using and how you're forecasting agriculture's need? Because we find that when the EA use the NEAC model is so far out of actual true. We don't actually always use 100% of the agricultural license that we're allowed. Sometimes we might only get to 50 or 30, or and they always model at 100% agriculture use. So that's my first question. What are you using?
So when it comes to current demand, we've used actual return data from the Environment Agency. So not what we think farmers could have taken, but actually what they took. When it comes to those future predicted demands, that's a huge uncertainty, if I'm honest. So the work that appeared on one of the early slides to illustrate the potential scale of change in the future is based on some work that WRE commissioned through Cranfield University a few years ago now. And I think we'd all agree it probably could do with an update. However, what I'm really pleased to see is that the agricultural sector, collectively through the Waterford Food Group and another of initiatives in certain catchments, is really stepping up here and being given the opportunity to plan for the longer term in terms of what might be needed. So actually what we're planning right now is to almost like hold fire on updating our own forecast, because we're not the ones who know agricultural and crop needs the best. It's for the sector really to then come to the regional group and say, look, we've done our work. We've actually now begun to be able to model and assess our future needs. Play those into your regional models, and we'll come up with a solution. Actually, we'll come up with a solution together, at least, that actually matches the future rather than just what we think from an academic basis.
Thanks for that, Ben. I mean, agriculture is rapidly changing at the moment, and we might all be lots of vineyards and wine producing, which will need the heat, less water. But yeah, we don't know, and it's rapidly changing. The second question I have is about ag water in reservoirs. Have you considered? I mean, there's a number of landowners and farmers have significantly sized bodies of water in reservoirs. Have you considered that they might be valuable and be able to put them back into public water supply and use some of those, and the farmers selling the water back to the grid?
I lost you for a few seconds, but I think you were asking about whether there's opportunities for reservoir water on farm to be put back into the public water supply network. Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah, that's right. There's a number of farms that have significant bodies of water, and that could be utilised and put back into the programme and used for public water supply or whatever. But obviously the farmer landowner would require a significant payment for that, but I think it would be cheaper than desal.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously every new option has its own local pros and cons. Sounds like a great idea, and hopefully some of the stuff that I think Daniel will talk about in the coming slides around local resource options and the opportunity for working on exactly those kinds of things hopefully gives a bit of scope to do that. And yeah, I think you're right. What we presented right there, particularly with the environmental destination scenarios, is okay. If we just use the types of options we've got at our disposal now, this is how we can solve it. But you can see that the cost of doing that and the other trade-offs of doing that are massive. So we need to be thinking smarter at different scales. So absolutely, those kinds of schemes are worth thinking about in the right context.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Peter Lanzol.
A new map was released a few days ago, which predicts that when global warming reaches 1.5 degrees, which presumably is fairly soon, a large part of Lincolnshire and Cambridgeshire will be subject to flooding from the sea. How much damage will that do to the water supply?
So I won't talk too specifically because again, the locations of different schemes have their own constraints. But I would say that when the options that have been proposed, and I briefly talked through there, they will get assessed, and they get assessed for their environmental opportunities and their environmental risks. So it would be the scheme promoter's responsibility, in this case, largely it's the water companies, to have made sure that any options that are being put forward aren't going to be hindered by flood risk. And I know there are a couple of schemes along our coast, for instance, where we do need to think carefully about that. But those assessments are taking place, and hopefully the mitigations being put in place as a result.
Thank you. Tony Henderson.
Hi, thank you. And yeah, thanks, Ben. Great presentation. Really, really insightful. Flags up all sorts of issues we're facing. Focus I have is on the leisure sector primarily. And I know you've done a lot of work with the agricultural sector. The leisure sector, the work that we've done over the last few years with the EA and the water companies is flagging that there is an expectation in the leisure sector, particularly with golf, that their irrigation totals are probably going to double over the next 10 years. We've got, across the nation, it's about 65% still use mains water for irrigation. We have been working with the Environment Agency, where they've they've started creating mapping where they're going to have to look at reducing abstraction licenses for golf irrigation. Some of those in your area are going to be losing between 75 and 100% of their abstraction license over the next 3 or 4 years. Working with Anglian Water and with George Warren, obviously you can't get a new connection for love nor money from Anglian Water because there's just not the water available, and they're subject to reductions in their abstraction license volumes as well. In the leisure sector, there is no equivalent grant to the agricultural water resilience grants, the reservoir grants, which I know they're going through a new round of, and I've been banging that drum now for a while with Bob Hillier and Angela Wallace and a number of other people in the Environment Agency to say, well, actually, where we are at the moment is that as far as the leisure sector is concerned, you're going to be taking away their abstraction. They're not going to have mains water availability, and you're going to end up in a legal turmoil because there are going to be all sorts of appeals against loss of abstraction water because it's going to impact the business. But there isn't at the moment that help to try and move them away. And a lot of the projects that we're looking at the moment are just so time consuming to achieve because of the regulations that you have to go through, the Environment Agency application of the connected water body, which is actually preventing integrated water management from happening. So a lot of these, I'd say, a bigger conversation in this group, but it's just to really flag up to you that there is a very significant use of water in the leisure sector. They're going to be losing their abstraction licenses. They haven't got any incentives for transitioning away from using either mains or abstracted water. And in fact, if they move away from using an existing mains connection, they're more likely to lose their irrigation water through loss of an abstraction license or a hands-off flow section 57 than they are at Tubbs. So the whole system at the moment in the leisure sector is the way I described it in one presentation I gave. Everything is set up perfectly to achieve the prevention of any action. And that's the bit that we need to change somehow. And I don't know how we change it. We've got projects at the moment looking at taking runoff from roads, M25, treated sewage effluent. We've got a project which I know Cranfield we're involved with, which has just taken 5 years, cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, and we haven't seen a drop yet. So there are too many blockers in the system at the moment. There's too much friction to allow the changes, to allow the leisure sector to, and it goes back to the gent that was talking the other a minute ago about the potential for storing, using leisure sites as a source of attenuation. to create that storage which we need for natural flood management, for filtration, improving water quality, all of that good stuff we can do. But unfortunately, with the existing system that we have at the moment, we can't do it.
Ben,
So
shall I
help,
take this one?
please.
Ben,
Yeah.
should I take this one?
Daniel?
Because I know, Tony, you mentioned George Warren, the work that you've been doing with him at Anglian Water as their integrated water manager, and we had a really good presentation from him on Friday at WRE's Drought Group about the potential for effluent reuse, having re-screened the 1,000-odd water recycling centres that Anglian Water have across the region for whether or not they might be able to at least release some treated effluent for offsetting non-household water use, non-potable uses for golf as well as potentially for irrigation. But I recognise, as you say, the challenge is getting over regulatory hurdles to be able to tap into some of those sources of water. And what we hope to do through both their own drought group and also the Cambridge Delivery Group, which I'll be talking about later, is see whether or not we can streamline that process so that it isn't both financially ruinous as well as incredible kind of a time investment of time in order to get some of those options off the ground. So we absolutely hear you, and that's the kind of thing that we'd like to push forward once we've got this regional plan published.
Brilliant.
Okay,
Right, thank you.
Katie Thornborough, Councillor Katie.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. I've got 3 questions, but I'll be quite quick. One is, I'm quite concerned about data centres being used in Cambridge, and we've heard so much about that they can use an awful lot of power and water, and with the development of AI, they are coming. And is it possible to work with that sector to ensure that they are innovative in their use of water as they come through, so that they don't overly add to the demands of water? That's my first one. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, I'm sure you're aware that the Lords have added into a clause 138 regarding protection, some extra protection to include chalk streams explicitly. And I wondered if that makes any difference to this plan going forward. I've heard some people being quite optimistic about it and some people being very pessimistic. And then finally, I'm afraid, Daniel, I keep going on about flats being water meters for flats. And I'm finding that there's one development in Cambridge built in only 2007. 20% of the flats have no water meters. They are only the property is metered with 1 meter, but not the individual households. And this is something which has been happening for at least a decade, and we are still getting planning applications coming through with 1 water meter for a whole block of flats. And there's no legislation to ask. My understanding is there's no legislation, but if we need this, if we need to be putting in smart meters, we need to ensure that every household is metered. So is there a way we can do that? Thank you.
Should I take this one, Ben? Yeah, so on data centres, data centres, one of the things that the plan will highlight, this final regional plan, is how much uncertainty there is around non-household growth and how much higher recent requests for new non-household connections have been above the 2019 kind of forecast within water company plans, and to the extent to which Anglian Water is having to decline a very large proportion of new requests for non-household supplies that come forward. What that does mean is that they can say to those new kind of suppliers or new connections, what are you doing to use as little potable water as possible? So that is part of the conversation they can have, as well as you say, unfortunately having to decline a very large proportion of those new connections. But as part of the Cambridge Delivery Group process, which again I'll talk about later, there is definitely a need to kind of audit what non-household use there is around Cambridge at the moment, and what projections of growth are there. Are they realistic? Are they missing out a whole chunk of potential new water use, which relates to data centres and these very new water intensive options? To be honest, I'm not an expert on the levelling up, and I was focusing on the nutrient neutrality kind of debate around the levelling up bill. We'll have to look into the chalk streams, but of course chalk streams will be protected under BAU plus if they are already have a European designation, and they all then become within the enhanced scenario. so would be captured under that additional those environmental destination investigations that we'll be pursuing over the next few years. And yeah, and again through the Cambridge Delivery Group process, highlighting this issue that you've raised before about particularly new housing developments where you've got multi-occupancy, multi-dwelling apartments. Sometimes you only have a single meter, and then that usage is split per dwelling on a kind of flat rate as part of the service, the annual service charge, and that has to change. And it is one of the things we're talking both to the NAVs about, the new appointment of variation companies, as well as to DLUC. Thank you.
So last two questions, and then we'll move on if we can. So John first, and then Francesca after that. But John Patrick.
Yeah, just a call out to Tony and your challenge with golf courses. Within our SWAG role, which is covering agriculture issues similar to what you're facing, we are picking up golf courses across East Anglia, and it is encouraging that Anglian Water are showing that support as well. I'd love to catch up with you offline, but I think an observation is that much though it's admirable the resource options that you've developed, Daniel, it's getting it within the commercial reach of agriculture and golf courses. I think I might have mentioned this before. The well publicised Felixstowe scheme cost $1 million when it was done in agricultural contractors. It cost 10 million if we did it with public water supply contracting. That puts it out of reach, the cost of water for golf clubs and agriculture. So much that's admirable, the amount of investment that's going to come in, the end cost of this water on current food production and golf membership, I guess, Tony, is puts many of these schemes out of our reach, because we're not Europe. We do fall foul of the bottom end of drought restrictions. So it's finding something that is actually going to be real for current funding, or do golf memberships, consumers of food have to accept there are considerable increases down the line to help fund these systems. And what I'd love to do, and this is some of what the Water Resource Management Plan is, that we're going to launch with Steve Moncaster's help through for Water for Food, is really trying to identify the need so that we can be properly represented in your plan, but at a cost that we can afford. And so, Tony, please give me a shout. We've already got 3 golf courses we're working with SWAG to try and bring some water to you.
Thank you. Francesca.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to be clear what the regional proposals are for enhanced environmental destination. I recently read the Arcadia report, and I'm gathering you want to do a graduated environment destination, and I just want to be clear so we can think about it at Natural England, because obviously the triple SIs and chalk streams are kind of in trouble now. So yeah, if someone could clarify that.
Well, what's kind of frustrating, I suppose, to some extent, is where I showed the quite large divergence in the cost, for example, and basically the scale of the supply options need to move from BAU plus, which is the scenario that's commonly used across all regions, consistency, and that enhanced, is that there's a huge jump between them, and then that's kind of holding us back to some extent, because we can focus on the really enormous task without actually seeing that the outcome we're probably going to be going for between now and 2050 is a patchwork of improvements where it's going to deliver the most for the environment. So yeah, as Daniel said, the enhanced environmental destination includes chalk streams and triple SI rivers, but it also includes getting hydrology to good in every single water body, irrespective of whether the current river basin management plan said it was cost effective to do so or not. Now that's a massive uncertainty to play through, and so that element of the enhanced destination is where the biggest uncertainty comes. And the Environment Agency's recent guidelines that they're updating right now about the environmental destination want to keep us focused on addressing where we understand the problem and looking for solutions to solve it, where it's cost effective or cost beneficial to do so, but continuing to think in this kind of scenario adaptive pathway manner for everything else. Otherwise, I think we're going to get constrained. I don't think we're actually going to start doing things on the ground. And that's why it's nice that when we ran our regional models, we were actually able to spot possible surpluses in water once the Fens Reservoir arises in the late 2030s, where we can actually start to now explore over the coming years, okay, where could that water be put to best use to improve the environment? And currently it's thought to be in Fenland and the Norfolk area, but maybe there's something else we can do with that. In terms of the plan, really, this is the big challenge we now need to move into. We almost need to say, right, the final plan now is going to get published in December, and we then need to work very hard and very quickly to understand how this patchwork of environmental improvements and the measures around abstraction that are going to be needed need to play through. So yeah, we're really, really keen that to see that each of the water companies, Water Industry National Environment Programme, WINEP, programs now includes a regional line that says work at a regional level, multi-sector basis to actually now figure out what we need to do. So that's what we need to go to, because really, if we think ahead to that 2032 decision point, that 2030 decision point I put on the slide, we really need to start having better answers in 2027, 2028 to allow us to plan for 2030. So it really starts accelerating our need to move forward on this.
Excellent, thank you very much. Also, just a quick question, sorry. Cambridge Water's Water Resource Management Plan, they have a deficit. Obviously, they're going for IROPI between 30 and 32. Do you have any idea of any transfers that could assist with them in that period?
Well, I won't speak wholly on behalf of Cambridge Water, but the time limited transfer that we discussed, supported by that interregional virtual trade, the earliest that we can rely on that currently in our plans is 2032. There is the possibility that there might be some surplus water and capacity in pipelines in 2031-32 from Anglian Water, but any sooner than that, it's currently we've kind of exhausted all of our supply options. But yeah, 2032 is the year where we're currently planning on for those transfers to come in.
Right, thank you very much, and thanks for the presentation. It's really good.
Thank you. So Daniel, over to you on that potpourri of policy developments.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So as you say, we've got a kind of a set of different policy developments that have taken place since the last time we got together as a group, which I wanted to kind of talk through, partly because they are interesting in themselves, but also because they kind of set the scene for our next business plan, which I'll be kind of moving on to next. So yeah, the business plan we published over the summer, we got lots of great feedback on it, but in kind of thinking about what our priorities should be and the kind of initial actions we want to take forward, obviously they should be set in the context of what's happening at the moment. So in terms of what has happened recently, clearly, first of all, I wasn't going to spend much time on this, to be honest, but water companies have now all published their business plans for the PR24 price review. So they're all available online alongside the revised draft water resource management plans, which Ben mentioned. And there's an enormous amount of documentation that sits behind them. But I do kind of encourage you to look through in terms of what the impacts might be. In terms of obviously the different schemes coming through the pipeline, impacts on bills. So lots of really kind of incredible kind of suite of documentation to chew over. What that has, I suppose, probably more relevant to our regional plan and our kind of business plan is the amount of effort and progress now being made on the agricultural side to get things going around water resources management planning. And obviously we've got on the key actors on the call today through Lindsay, Steve Moncaster, John Patrick, and many others who through the Water for Food group, together with DEFRA and the Environment Agency, have really got things going. Again, I wasn't going to spend too much time on the templates for agricultural or agri-food water resources management plans and drought management plans, which, as I understand it, are being developed and starting to be tested. But we have now also got some commitments from government, from ministers and from the Environment Agency for some funding to help develop kind of catchment and more localised scale agri-food water resource management plans, and to develop local resource options which could support future agricultural needs. I'll come on to those in a moment, just to explain what's happening in more detail, and obviously invite John, Steve and Lindsay to say any more. But also, if I can give you an update on the Cambridge Water Scarcity Working Group, which WRE, as well as the water companies and many others on the call, are engaged with. And also just to reflect on the nutrient neutrality kind of debacle in the Lords not so long ago, to kind of recognise where the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme sits within that, and some of the other options we're taking forward instead of nutrient neutrality. And finally, lots going on around the future of regional planning. Just as we emerge from this first round, the Environment Agency have got studies now underway that are starting to get toward the kind of reporting stage, both on how regional groups should be set up and kind of governed within a national approach to water resources planning, and also the funding for regional groups, which, if us particularly as a multi-sector organisation, as an independent organisation, is really key to us kind of moving forward. But on just to kind of steal a few slides from the Environment Agency back about agricultural water resources planning. Some of you will have seen these slides or a version of them on other calls, but just all I wanted to kind of just to represent is that there is a lot happening on this front now. And what this slide tries to show in quite a complicated way is that the Environment Agency is thinking about agricultural water resources planning from a kind of catchment scale point of view, first of all, and that those are the kind of hexagons that you can see, that kind of honeycomb that you can see in the middle chart. And what they want to be able to do for those different catchments is engage consultants on developing kind of demand scenarios for agri-food within each different catchment, look at the environmental destination from that catchment point of view. So again, that kind of long-term changes in abstraction licenses and the volumes of water available that may be relevant to particular catchments. Update their abstraction licensing strategies for each catchment based on future demands and the amount of water that the environment may need, and as well as a degree of local engagement. So, and this is all going to be led by the Environment Agency, but importantly being done hand in hand with the regional groups as well. So there is a role for us as a regional group to be playing into those catchment scale studies, and also to take the results of those studies and integrate them into our next round of regional plans. And they're also obviously very much being done together with the water abstractor groups, with BAWAG, with East Suffolk, with the LARC and other abstractor groups where they exist around the country, so that each of those hexagons may actually be a local water abstractor group plan, which has already been kind of developed from the bottom up. So again, quite a complicated picture, but that's the way in which the Environment Agency is thinking about this. And hopefully once the funding has been confirmed, they'll start to commission some of these consultancy projects to start to develop what these catchment kind of agri-food catchment plans might look like. The other, really exciting development is around local resource options. So at the Farm to Fork summit that the Prime Minister hosted in Number 10 back earlier in the summer, there was a commitment to fund the water abstractor groups, potentially with the regional groups, to investigate different new sources of local water supplies which could meet the deficits projected for agriculture in particular. So the Environment Agency is working since then both to obviously lock down and agree the funding internally within the department, but also create a kind of framework for these feasibility studies. And these will be kind of chunks of money that water abstractor groups can apply for, potentially with the regional groups, potentially with others, to investigate in detail some of these local resource options. And they could be things like obviously winter storage reservoirs, there could be transfers, water sharing, water trading schemes. It could be the effluent reuse projects we were talking about before. It could be managed aquifer recharge, as John has trialled at the Felixstowe Hydrostow project, as well as the capturing and recycling IDB drainage water. So all those kinds of local resource options are in play. And there will be a process whereby abstractor groups, perhaps working with the regional groups, will be able to apply for the funding that DEFRA and the Environment Agency will make available. But yet to be confirmed exactly how much money, what the process looks like, what the timetable is, but certainly again encouraging progress from the government that they get the need to fund some of this work, and are encouraging kind of water abstractor groups to come together to bid for the funding when it's released. I think I've probably covered most of this already, but again, you've got on the right hand side the list of different options that the Environment Agency and DEFRA are wanting and hoping to fund through this process. And just on the last point on the left-hand side, obviously once you've been through this feasibility stage of looking into those options, there could then be the promise of the grant funding that is already available for the water management grant from DEFRA. So as well as the feasibility stage funding, also potentially for implementation too. That was actually, shall I just pause before I go any further onto the Cambridge Delivery Group, in case there was Lindsay, John, Steve, anybody else wanted to come in on that progress? But I say from my perspective, quite encouraging to see it starting to come together.
Daniel,
yeah, Lindsay, yeah.
but just to comment, I think you've covered it pretty well, and it is encouraging, but there's still work to do, and yes, I mean it's great stuff. We also still have concerns here and there, but that's always going to be the case. But it's pretty dramatic, really, and something to look forward to. So we're very optimistic.
Brilliant. And I guess, we have to, Lindsay, John Patrick, Steve, you have to take the credit for this, because this is a huge amount of effort behind the scenes really to get DEFRA and Environment Agency engaged on this, and brilliant that some of the funding is starting to come through. John.
Yeah, I think also, just to reinforce it, this is all badged up for agricultural benefit, but I think any of the other smaller non-major stakeholders that are feeling a little bit kind of alone at the moment, I'm sure a lot of this can be adapted for their benefit as well as agriculture.
Yeah, I agree. I think in some of these test cases, like trying to unlock the potential of effluent reuse, definitely will kind of lay the groundwork for other sectors to come forward too. John Meehan. I think you must be on mute there, John.
Oops, a daisy. Yeah, very exciting, and I put something in the chat along the lines of welcoming something like this. And I suppose because as a local authority with a lead local flood authority, we look for dual use of these flood storage reservoirs, which have an option on holding back water from flooding downstream, as well as storing water. So, with the EA there, I'm hoping that's their multi-benefit thinking. So that looks exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Thank you. Right, well, moving on to the Cambridge Delivery Group. So I'm sure people will have seen the announcement by Michael Gove earlier this summer. I think it was back in June, where he launched a long-term plan for housing, which identified Cambridge alongside a couple of different areas. I think Leeds was one of the other ones, where he thought there was significant potential for growth, including not just in housing, but for kind of commercial developments with life sciences in the frame for Cambridge in particular. Because water scarcity was highlighted as a potential constraint on growth, particularly around Greater Cambridge, the announcement included setting up a Cambridge Delivery Group chaired by Peter Freeman, who's the chair of Homes England, and a Cambridge Water Scarcity Working Group, which would, again, with WRE, with the water companies, with academics, with other kind of stakeholders in the Cambridge area, Natural England, the Environment Agency, Ofwat, looking at how you can unlock the constraints on growth from a lack of water resources. And I guess the kind of it became apparent quite quickly through those early conversations that it's not just about what the long-term projections of growth might mean for Greater Cambridge through to 2040, but there is an immediate challenge as a result of the Environment Agency changing their stance on planning applications that are already going through now. That there were, again, it was reported over the summer that thousands of homes are now on hold through the planning system because of the Environment Agency's concerns about that additional water use placing greater pressure on local aquifers, when obviously the ambition and the goal here is to reduce abstraction and to back off current levels of abstraction from the CAM, the chalk aquifer. So there is an immediate challenge that the Cambridge Delivery Group is focused on about how to unlock that constraint on growth and allow that housing to proceed whilst protecting the water bodies. Then there is a challenge, as we kind of talked about in the context of the regional plan, between now and the early 2030s, where the emphasis has to be on demand management because there are no supply side schemes on the horizon waiting to ride to the rescue. So what more can be done in that kind of short to medium term to reduce existing consumption of water through retrofit projects, through kind of water efficiency policies, through tighter building regulations, opening up rainwater reuse, looking at other options for displacing potable water. And then in the long term, what more can be done if there are to be higher projections of growth beyond what's already within the emerging plan for Greater Cambridge? What other supply side options could come forward, because the numbers are really quite significant. We're talking about an extra 50,000 or so more homes by 2040 under the Greater Cambridge's version of the local plan. And under the government's ambitions, there could be an additional 200 or so thousand houses on top of that. So we're engaged in this process. So we're working very closely with DLUC and with DEFRA, with the water companies, with regulators. And partly for us, it's about Greater Cambridge, but partly for us, it's hoping to push forward on some of our policy priorities, which would help across the whole of the region. You know, can we at least use this exercise to unlock building regulations so that planning authorities can set tighter, more ambitious targets within the areas where clearly there is a water scarcity challenge? Can we unlock the ability for community scale non-potable supplies to new households, where at the moment the Drinking Water Inspectorate is objecting to schemes like at Eddington, where they've got a communal water reuse scheme, but it can't be switched on because the Drinking Water Inspectorate won't give it a permit. So there's these kind of legacy policy problems of being hidden barriers, and because we've got a direct line into DLUC and to DEFRA, perhaps we can use this process to unlock some of those. So they are working toward an announcement, first of all, at the autumn statement, which is set now for the 22nd of November. Obviously, they've not shared with us what that statement might include. You know, no confirmation as yet. But just from our own kind of, this is our kind of, I guess, our hit list of things which we would like to see mentioned in the statement. So they have said that there's a £3 million pot of funding for water efficiency retrofit schemes. So we're talking about fitting leakage control devices, talking about kind of water efficient taps and showers, toilets, flow control devices, so but within existing buildings, so to reducing consumption within schools and hospitals, public buildings, potentially within Cambridge University itself, within housing associations as well. So potentially quite a lot of potential for cost-effective water savings within the existing housing estate, but also options around kind of campaigns linked to the new Ofwat Water Efficiency Fund, which should be getting going in the next kind of year or so. Potentially a water retrofit credit scheme. So this is a scheme whereby anybody who kind of delivers an accredited water efficiency saving within an existing building. Sorry, can I just get rid of that reminder? Can kind of sell the credit of that water efficiency saving through to developers in order for their development to go through. A scheme like this is already up and running in North Sussex, so it's just about kind of taking best practice that's already happening elsewhere in the country and applying it to the Cambridge context. I've already mentioned things like allowing building regulations to be set at a more ambitious level. There's a 2015 written ministerial statement from government which prevents that at the moment, and about the kind of unlocking the ability for new developments to be supplied with non-potable water for things like irrigation and flushing toilets. On the supply side, what we'd like to, obviously is rapid to help us de-risk some of those major supply side options that we need to meet Cambridge Water's requirements. So the Fens Reservoir particularly, and that reverse trade and transfer. Whether or not they can streamline the development and consent order process so that, again, the Fens Reservoir doesn't get kind of caught up with by the planning inspectorate, doesn't kind of have delays when it goes through Secretary of State approval. And also, as WRE, how we can look at further supply side options as part of those kind of adaptive pathways. So how might additional growth of the type and scale that the government is talking about, how could they be met by additional interregional transfers, or kind of bringing forward desalination, water reuse, or other schemes to help meet that growth. But yeah, lots on the long list. Let's see what the government says on the 22nd. And again, shall I just pause there in case, I know, Katie, you're on the call, others from the Cambridge context on the call. Anything to add? Yeah, Katie.
I'm so pleased to hear that all of this is happening. It's really, really really needed a while back, but so it's great. My one question is the proposed water recycling plant in Horningsea, does that still not include water reuse, or has that, because my understanding is the current application doesn't, although the long-term water resources plan does include that, and it would seem sensible to get that added on to the application so that it comes through with the first build of the build out. Thanks.
Ben, is that something you can pick up? So this is obviously Anglian Water got the current water recycling centre at Milton Road. It's moving just north of the A14, I think it is. Ben, is water reuse planned for that new site?
That is being potentially the Milton reuse scheme that was previously referenced in the draft plan may be pushed back to later in the plan now as a result of the interregional reverse trade and feeds Cambridge Water, amongst other things, but it's still there in a couple of adapted pathways. I need to remind myself exactly which one.
Okay, perhaps we can come back to you, Katie, just to clarify on that. And I know we've got Natalie, I think, Dan on the call as well, in case you want to put anything in the chat. Peter?
I had a meeting with Martin Woolhead, Deputy Director of DEFRA, and Stephen Kelly, the Head of Greater Cambridge Shared Planning. And I learned from that in order to justify building one new house, you need to retrofit for water efficiency either 2 or 3 existing houses, and each costs between £500 and £800. So a lot of money is going to be needed.
Indeed, and I think I've had, first of all, larger numbers of houses need to be retrofitted. Sometimes like 7 or 8 houses need to be retrofitted to bring them down, let's say, from about a 130, 140 average to about 100, 110, in order to offset the additional 110, 120 that a new house might kind of put pressure on. But so partly it's about building regulations for me. So can we tighten building regulations so that a new home being built in future years uses more like 80 or 85 litres per person per day, instead of the 110 to 125 that homes built today currently use, but plus also that water retrofit approach. And again, those figures seem quite high, 500 to 800 pounds. I think, certainly. So flow control devices can be fitted alongside smart meters. So just in the street in order to make sure that when taps are turned on, they're not gushing kind of 20, 25, 30 litres per minute. It's more like kind of 8, 10, 12 litres per minute. And they're relatively cheap. They can be fitted at the same time smart meters, and they will have quite a significant impact on savings themselves. So I think you probably do need to have more homes fitted per new dwelling, but maybe not for the price that perhaps Martin was quoting.
Well, I challenged that price, but I didn't get anywhere.
Well, I guess that's where developers come in, because they will be buying the credits. And I mentioned this kind of credit scheme, and that will reveal, I suppose, the true cost of retrofitting existing homes. And you're likely to see the costs come down when you get different people trying to obviously compete for those kinds of savings within Cambridge.
And I think what this is all showing and demonstrating is that water has been significantly undervalued for decades, and it's not possible to get cheap solutions. We're beyond cheap solutions for these things, and water needs to be properly valued. Then there will be knock-on consequences of this. That's the reality.
Jonathan, you got your hand up?
Hello, I'm the Planning Policy Manager for Greater Cambridge Shared Planning, and I think this all does sound really useful, but to me, one of the things we've been emphasising to our communities and our members is that actually Cambridge isn't that unique in terms of water planning, and it's the entire east of England that is under these pressures. So I think the obvious point here is that if the wider region could do more of the points in these slides, it would free up more water for moving around and dealing with the whole region. The other issue is our issues being picked up at a wider than regional level. So we know that the CAM catchment actually stretches into the southeast region, and they're abstracting water from the aquifer too. and it would seem that some of the measures and the standards for leakage and so on aren't as strong for affinity to the south of our region as they are being asked of Cambridge water. So why is that wider level picture not being applied? So Cambridge isn't that unique. These issues should be addressed across the whole region to solve the problem at a wider level, would be my point.
Paul, did you want to comment on that? Or
well, I think it's interesting because one of the points that Daniel and I made at the last Cambridge water discussion was that the answers to Cambridge have to be found outside of the Cambridge boundary, because if you are going to put more water in, then you will require it. I think, though, that the Michael Gove intervention, with the number of additional homes that he was talking about, is a Cambridge pressure. I think the other thing that's really interesting is that there is potentially around Cambridge, being an innovation hub, a significant additional non-household requirement through things like the biosciences campus, the new hospitals that are required or looking for water. So Greater Addenbrooke's campus looking for water, as Katie highlighted earlier, the data hubs and the data centers. And so I think there is a real pressure across the region, but I do think there is a particular pressure just now within Cambridge, and it is within the Cambridge area that the Environment Agency has got this 9,000 properties on hold, which they don't have elsewhere unless it's on a nutrient neutrality issue up in North Norfolk.
but as I said, Jonathan, this is why we want to make sure that we're not just solving the policy challenges for Cambridge, and actually, if we unlock that written ministerial statement that prevents tighter building regulations being set, that they do that across the country, because you say, because the region's increasingly interconnected, it does matter, how much water is being used in different catchments surrounding Cambridge, because as Paul says, the answer doesn't lie in Cambridge, it lies elsewhere.
Yeah. John Henry has a question. Now's a good time for John Henry to ask it. You're on mute.
I double clicked. Sorry. Thank you, Paul. One of the things I've got I think what we're doing here is phenomenal, right? This group, and I'm really over my career. I'm one of the gray hairs, albeit not quite as some yet. But one of the things, I've been involved in lots of relevant projects, but one of the things I'm trying to get people to do, and I'm working through IOD and other bodies at the moment, to look at the good news from the UK. The global carbon emissions is of the order of 40 gigatons. So that's 40,000 million tons, if that's not a number you relate to. The UK is about 350 million tons. We are 0.9% of carbon emissions as a country, territorially. We import about 0.4% of global emissions. So the total UK carbon footprint is 1.3% of the global. We're like the 6th largest economy and the 8th largest manufacturing country in the world. And so I'm trying to get people to look at this good news from what we've accomplished here and look at resilience and adaptation as areas of investment for boards and companies, which is exactly what this is about. We're looking at adaptation, resilience. And one of the things I'm trying to get companies to look at as well is that because of this good news and the fact that the UK is on a good track, we also need to now, if the UK went net zero tomorrow, we'd still have the same climate risk that we do today. And we need to be looking at international investment to help other countries like the Cameroon, where 1% of the people have grid electricity. And so we could, if we help them with something, they would reduce energy deforestation. I know that's not what we're focused on, but what I would like to do is to find a way to elevate WRE's work as so positive on helping deliver a future that's going to be livable and sustainable, and isn't only focused at carbon reduction. Carbon reduction doesn't go away. Don't misunderstand me. I guess you could probably misunderstand me. So Paul, anybody else, how do we get higher profile? Because there's so much good stuff going on in the UK that nobody knows about. And this is phenomenal what this group is doing, in my opinion. That's the question.
Well, that's very kind, first of all. We'll capture that. And to be honest, it's one of those things that we've always wanted to do, to have more of a kind of international presence. And part of our vision is to be a kind of international exemplar of integrated water management. And we hope we are fulfilling that in what we do, but I don't think we do a good enough job at telling the story. And so I don't know, John, if there's examples, different opportunities that you might know about that we can perhaps use to promote what we're doing, and just kind of just to highlight the different opportunities, the approach we've taken, and hopefully the difference we're making.
Well, I think we need to find a way on both the COP28 and the next ecology COP after 15, which was over in Canada last year, to get this on the agenda, that this is a way of delivering. We can't just beat everybody with a stick, say reduce your carbon. We've got to help people see what we can do in a positive fashion. And this is a great example. The US developed catchment management plans before we did, but we've really picked up that and are doing that. And because of our high population density and water demand, this is a really good example of proactive thinking as we try to take forward solution-based options. And this could take a while till we come up with the right answers. But if we didn't do some of this, we'd be in real trouble. And it's just a perspective that global climate change, if the UK was net zero a year ago, would be the same. But we're still reducing carbon, but we're doing this group is one of the best I've seen yet of reducing, improving resilience and adaptation.
No, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Paul, how can we get the government to understand this better?
And world peace tomorrow.
Yeah, well, the day after.
Yeah. But I think it's a good challenge for us
I'll be
to
right back.
investigate.
Okay, I'll be in a few minutes. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I think it is something that we just need to factor into our thinking and in our discussions with the other regional groups, and how we take this forward in our discussions with government and others.
Yeah, because energy is such a crucial delivery of society, and water is going to have to be next, or if not prior to energy. And I live near Horncastle, which got a surplus water recently, and as some of you probably appreciate. But we don't get it in a consistent, sustainable manner. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, is I think we need to look at raising the quality of what this group is doing and providing a network solution. Paul, you probably remember in the 90s, I worked on the project, the Ning Waterways Partnership.
Yep.
It had a fancy name anyway. That was getting a bunch of people to work together to come up with budget combined better outcomes. Well, that's what's happening here, but much, much greater. And so I think you guys need to blow this group's horn somehow or another and get the government to focus on solution-based outcomes from this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Daniel.
A couple more updates just to give before we get into the business plan. So first of all, just briefly on the North Water Strategy Programme, because probably 3-4 months ago, we were hoping that the nutrient neutrality market, the nutrient credit market, will fund a large proportion of the nature-based approaches that we were hoping to kind of launch and to install in Norfolk in order to fund and to leverage the public funding that we've got. So nutrient neutrality has presented a challenge, but we've refocused the programme around water resources, but with kind of water quality benefits. And first of all, the great news is that Anglian Water and Norfolk County Council are now kind of committed to fund the project through the next 18 months, which is fantastic. And we've got a new programme manager joining the team from January. So nutrient neutrality, because not only the fact that the government tried to kind of delete that part of the legislation and basically instruct planning authorities to turn a blind eye to any nutrient impacts and new developments, that attempt was quashed in the House of Lords, but it's created a policy vacuum, policy uncertainty. Nutrient neutrality rules still apply. Housing developments will need to show how they offset and mitigate any nutrient impacts. But because of that policy uncertainty, it's not, there's not, as far as I can tell, a nutrient credit market that's going to kind of spring into being anytime soon. What we do have is Natural England's nutrient mitigation scheme, and there was additional funding as part of the announcement made earlier this summer. But as I say, what we're doing now is focusing more on the water resources benefits, including for potential, for agriculture, other sectors, but primarily to help groundwater infiltration and to avoid hands-off flow conditions starting to be imposed. And the other really interesting and quite exciting development is from Anglian Water, and as part of their business plan, buried in the massive stack of documents that they published alongside the business plan itself, was an annex which talks about their Advanced Water Industry National Environment Programme, which covers, I think I'll get to that slide in a moment, but it covers basically Norfolk and large parts of the Cam and Ely Ouse catchment. And the idea there is to look at how you deliver environmental outcomes in partnership through the landscape, as opposed to solely Anglian Water focusing, as it has in the past, on their kind of point sources of pollution at water recycling centres. So, as I say, we've done even more modelling over the summer months, looking at the benefits of nature-based solutions, particularly runoff attenuation features for increasing groundwater infiltration in order to support base flows. And the modelling is really quite positive. Obviously, we need to validate these models, hopefully conduct field trials to make sure these numbers are real. But they do show that for relatively little land take and for relatively little cost in each case, you can significantly enhance base flows within catchments, not just in North Norfolk and the Wensum, I think this modelling was for, but also we've modelled with the Environment Agency the Cam catchment as well. And if that works, if it delivers the benefits we expect, that means that abstractors could encounter hands-off flow conditions less frequently. And also combined with some of the other kind of options around soil improvements, you could potentially have quite a big impact on the way in which the kind of groundwaters work, with benefits, with co-benefits for carbon sequestration, for nutrient management, and for biodiversity. And we've got funding from WWF to field trial these runoff attenuation features with enhanced monitoring, again to validate our models and give us confidence those kind of model results are real. And linked to the Cambridge Delivery Group, we're really hoping that there will be a nature-based element of the Cambridge Delivery Group strategy, so that it's not just about water efficiency retrofits, supply-side schemes, but there is a focus on using nature-based approaches to support groundwater infiltration as part of an overall kind of water neutrality strategy. And just again to kind of highlight, if you've got time, to look at Anglian Water's advanced WINEP proposals that were published alongside their business plan, you'll notice that there's a familiar name involved in behind all of this. Robin Price obviously was my predecessor as managing director here. Where with Kate Trumper within Anglian Water and Martin Bowes and many others, they've developed this approach which now has the Environment Agency and Ofwat's endorsement to sit as part of the business plan for about £25 million, which would deliver a system of grants across these catchments together with a kind of partnership hub to try and get these different partnership schemes to delivering environmental outcomes up and running. That's not to say that they definitely have got the money, because it still has to go through that the price review process. But the fact they've got early endorsement from both the Environment Agency and Ofwat is a really positive development. And the link here back to the Norfolk Water Strategy is that potentially is a kind of long-term home, whereby the Norfolk Water Strategy, together with Anglian Water, Norfolk County Council, the Norfolk Water Strategy lays the groundwork, first of all, over the next 18 months to build schemes, to develop partnerships, to warm up funders to investing in a portfolio of nature-based approaches. But it then becomes more like business as usual, at least for these catchments, through the way in which the water industry is investing in outcomes, the public sector is investing in outcomes through environmental land management, that we can leverage philanthropy funding, potentially nutrient mitigation funding if it's off the ground by then, and it creates a much larger investment pool within which we can influence through the Norfolk Water Strategy to get nature-based solutions off the ground at scale. I probably should move on just in the interest of time, but please raise hands. Perhaps we'll pause after this last bit of updates. But just in terms of the regional groups ourselves, so working with Jean Spencer on the call as chair of the National Framework Senior Steering Group with the other regional groups, with the Environment Agency. Obviously, we were told back in January that there would be a second round of regional planning. That was really important at the time, just to give us, so we can maintain momentum from the end of this first phase and crack on straight into the second. But the question of governance for regional groups and how we should be funded going forward was always a question that needed to be resolved. And the great news is that the Environment Agency commissioned funding on both fronts over the summer months. So Mott MacDonald's, they're almost ready to report on what the governance should look like. And Arup are looking at ways in which regional groups can be funded from a multi-sector perspective, so that we're no longer so reliant on investment from water companies to pay for studies. We can do things on a multi-sector basis once, to the benefit of all sectors across the whole region. So the Mott MacDonald study should be published, or at least be available later on this year. The Arup study is going to take a little bit longer. We'll have to wait until the new year for that. But again, it's looking at how these how us and the other regional groups can be funded going forward. But in the meantime, the Environment Agency has asked us and the other regional groups for what we need funding for in the short term, so that we can kind of start to commission some studies. And this is a kind of high level summary of it. About that. Wait, dogs at the door. This is just a high-level summary of the things that we have asked for funding from the Environment Agency. So first of all, to make sure that we've got multi-sector representation on our board. We already have that representation, but at the moment, as it explained in our draft business plan, it's funded through membership fees from local councils, from the NFU and ADA. And what we'd like to do is move away from that kind of pay-to-play model to one which is much more secure and sustainable, representing different interests, different multi-sector interests across the board, and with a more stable and secure source of funding going forward. So we've now asked for that initially from the Environment Agency. But from the rest of the list, you can see the kinds of things that we've asked for that we would like to commission. So as Ben mentioned earlier, water companies will be funded through the Water Industry National Environment Programme to conduct environmental destination investigations for different catchments across the region. And we'd like to be given the additional funding to make sure they can be commissioned once for all sectors, so that every sector can plan on a long-term basis for the water that the environment needs. We also have asked for funding so that we can support that process to search for local resource options. As we mentioned earlier, the Environment Agency and DEFRA will be funding the water abstractor groups themselves, but we hope that the Environment Agency will also give us at least a degree of funding to support that process, to guide their search, to evaluate different options, and to help build the business cases. And also following on from things like the Norfolk Water Strategy, things like Water for Tomorrow, which came to a conclusion earlier on this year, developing the kind of next set of tools that we think we need at the regional scale and can support kind of catchment and more localised kind of multi-sector water resources planning to build on the approaches that we've taken together, and to do simple things like updating projections of agri water resource needs. As we were saying earlier, the data sets that we rely on are now several years out of date. Let's update those projections, but also look again at energy, at navigation, at industry, at leisure as well. Tony, if your projected water resource needs are increasing as much as you suggest, and also simple things like creating kind of generic cost curves, generic cost data, so that different options can be evaluated on a consistent basis across sectors and across the region to support investment choices and to support modelling. And finally, we would love to be able to support the development of local nature recovery strategies across the region. We can be doing that as part of this next phase of the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme, but we think there's a role for regional groups to help guide and steer and encourage local councils who are leading on those local nature recovery strategies to really think deeply about the water environment, to not only deliver benefits for biodiversity and terrestrial species and habitats, but to think about the ways in which local nature recovery strategies can support our regional plan to deliver outcomes for water quality, for water resources, and for flood risk management as well. All of those things need funding. We've requested that funding. Obviously, we wait and see what the Environment Agency can provide. But on to governance, and there's two parts of the chart here, just left and right. So the left-hand side chart is from Mott MacDonald. So this is their kind of first go in draft at how the governance of regional planning should operate in future. And on the right-hand side are proposals from Steve Moncaster, from Lindsay, from John Patrick, about how the agricultural sector should organise itself to be able to play into both regional and national scale water resources planning. So on the left hand side, we've still got the same structure of a kind of national steering group termed here as the Natural Water Resources Group. I think the idea is to retain the existing National Framework Senior Steering Group, retaining the regional water resources groups, but the most interesting stuff I think is happening at the sub-regional scale. So it's floating the idea of creating potentially kind of sub-regional water resource groups, maybe catchment scale groups, linking much more closely with catchment partnerships, because under the DEFRA plan for water reforms, catchment partnerships should have a bigger play in thinking about integrated water management, potentially with some more funding to think about how in which, you know, ways in which catchments can be improved from a water quality, water resources perspective. You bring in different sectors, and you know, water abstractor groups have come primarily from a kind of agricultural background. I know some water abstractor groups are much wider than that. You can bring in other agri-food businesses, food manufacturing, talking to energy sectors. You know, John Patrick, you're talking to the leisure sector as well. So that's already starting to happen. But the extent to which water abstractor groups, if there is a model to be applied as new groups get set up, should they actually be set up at a multi-sector basis, you know, working much more closely with the catchment partnerships, as for example, I know, Lindsay, you do within the River Lark. So one of those questions, again, probably isn't quite bedded down yet, but interesting thoughts about how groups should come together at the sub-regional scale, both to meet their own water resources needs, but also then to play into regional and national scale conversations. And only to say on the right-hand side, we completely support the proposals coming forward through the Water for Food group from the agricultural sector about how water abstractor groups should play into regional planning groups, should play into the National Framework Senior Steering Group. And it's really nice to see those proposals come together in such a kind of consistent way. And that was it. Sorry, it's quite a long update, Paul, but should I pause there for questions?
Yeah, thank you. John, Ian.
Very pleased to see the initiative with the local nature recovery strategy, Daniel. As you know, the counties are the authorities that are delivering those. I suppose Essex has a 30% natural green infrastructure target going forward, and I think we need to, I know we're focused on water here, but land use change, as you know, is 1/3 of the Essex water strategy, and we need to consider that nature areas absolutely absorb and cleanse the water as it goes through, because there's no nutrient, herbicide or pesticide inputs into those areas. And I think that's, you know, I think we need to engage that agenda more strongly. I know we're focusing on reservoirs, and we absolutely support that, and the nature conservation benefits of reservoirs and lakes and water courses, but the land use change is pretty core to cleaning the water supply. So we've done LNRS and water strategy presentations hand in glove with our senior leadership team to recognise that both are dovetail.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, that's great. And kind of going back to the Norfolk example, runoff attenuation features, we think, have a lot of opportunity there for water resources benefits, but they're also essentially, you know, small ponds, which you could place strategically from a biodiversity perspective, you know, connecting up, you know, creating, you know, wetland corridors that kind of trap sediments, that trap nutrients, as well as help to support groundwater infiltration. So, you know, if there are other local nature recovery strategies, other councils, other lead authorities on the call that we're not already talking to, as we are with John through Lucy, then do let us know.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. On with the business plan.
On with the business plan.
Sprint.
Onto the final lap. Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, well, first of all, our current business plan finishes at the end of this calendar year, 2023. So it was launched in 2019 when Water Resources East became an independent not-for-profit company. It ran from 2020 to 2023. So over the last year or so, we've been having various conversations at various different levels to refresh our business plan priorities and set ourselves up well for the next round. We published a draft consultation. We circulated it for informal consultation amongst our membership and also amongst DEFRA, the Environment Agency, our regulators, over the summer. And we obviously have been reflecting on people's feedback and updating the draft since then. In terms of the responses, we didn't get a huge number of responses. Let's say we've got probably about a dozen, 15, 20 or so. But what we did get was a really nice spread. We got some very detailed responses from the people who did give us feedback. And they, really encouragingly, they came from a wide range of different sectors, from the environmental side. Obviously, our water companies really played in strongly, as well as the agricultural from the NFU, but also from abstractor groups, from power. So a nice representation, even if we didn't get thousands of detailed comments. In terms of the key points of feedback, first of all, people supported the periods that we were covering within the business plan. So it's designed to run from next year through to the end of the second round of regional planning. But as we recognised in the plan, we will probably need to do quite a substantial kind of mid-period update, because the national framework for water resources is itself being updated, and that will set the requirements for the second round of regional planning. That won't get finalised until the spring of 2025. So imagine that we'll probably need to kind of refresh the business plan again, maybe in a light touch way, maybe in a more substantial way, let's see, in about 18 months' time. But what we do need to do to make sure in the business plan is make sure we're kind of focusing on what we need to do in the short term, as well as looking ahead to the next round of regional planning. And in general, there was a sense of, let's make sure that people know this is urgent. There is an urgency, kind of sense of urgency within the business plan. We need to make early progress and not just wait, obviously, for the next national framework to tell us what to do. There were generally supportive comments of retaining the existing vision as it stands, which I'll kind of talk about a little more in a moment. Some suggestions about kind of changing some of the wording, but again, I'll get on to that in a moment. Again, generally supportive of appointing board members, as I was just saying, based on their skills and experience, as opposed to, as we are at the moment, tying particular seats on the board to funding contributions. And if we get funding either through this initial exercise from the Environment Agency or through the ARIP study, which I mentioned is now underway, then we would transition from a kind of pay-to-play model to a one based on kind of skills and experience as soon as we can. Again, quite a lot of support for the 5 strategic priorities that we included in the draft plan, but also a sense that we were just there was just too many different things. There were strategic aims, there were strategic priorities, there were early initiatives. And so what we tried to do was just rationalise the set of aims and priorities that we've got. And also the annexes that we included, there was a kind of a risk. There was a kind of snapshot of our risk matrix. I think there was some budgetary information in there as well. What we decided to do is, because that will get quite out of date quite quickly, that will include that kind of information within our annual report to the AGM. One of the comments actually was about making sure that WRE as an organisation is kind of open and transparent about its business, and we absolutely endorse that. But maybe the way to do that is through the annual report to the AGM, as opposed to having a snapshot in the business plan, which may then not be updated for 18 months, if not even longer than that. So in terms of the vision, as I said, there were various comments about maybe bringing sustainable water resources into the wording, improving raw water quality, which is a more substantial change. If we were focusing both on water quality and water resources as our core objectives, then that would be quite a substantial change. And I think we would want to make sure that we've got the government support to do that through the next national framework, and other ways of which are tweaking the vision. But because we know that we may need to update the vision again anyway in 18 months' time, the board decided just to kind of stick with the vision as it is. It's fit for purpose. It tells a story, and kind of obviously gives us that kind of maintaining the consistency through into the second round. So for the time being, we'll stick with the vision as it is, but then obviously reflect on the feedback we've already had and the national framework when it comes out in 18 months' time. As I mentioned, there was a lots of different things, different kind of measures, different priorities, actions and aims within the draft plan, and we've rationalised those now down so that actually the strategic aims were quite an odd mix of kind of outcomes and processes. So we've decided to actually to kind of get rid of those altogether and just focus on our priorities underneath our vision. So we have the vision at the top, we have 5 strategic priorities, and then underneath the strategic priorities, we have a set of actions, some of which are early actions, some of which are longer term actions. And to wrap all of this together, a set of kind of success measures which we'll use each year, reporting to the AGM on whether or not we're achieving and delivering against the business plan. So hopefully it's a much more kind of streamlined set of activities which roll from the vision to the priorities to the actions and then into the measures of success. And as an example, this is a kind of table which we hope will feature in the final business plan, which shows how the 5 strategic priorities on the left-hand side are backed up by measure success. And we also recognise that you would want these measures of success to be smart, to be specific and measurable and time-bound and all those good things. Some of them are quite difficult to actually turn into smart targets, but we've tried to make them as measurable as we can. So, for example, our role is not necessarily to do the catchment scale activity, but actually to make sure we are supporting catchment scale activity across the region to enable long-term planning and environmental improvement across sectors. And our role is to make sure that there are catchment plans in place that, again, they're not necessarily our plans. They could be the Environment Agency's plans or Water Abstractor Group plans, probably actually in practice a combination of all of those different things. But at least there are catchment plans out there that show what the demand for water will be within particular sectors and how different options could come together to meet and satisfy those demands going forward. And also the kind of future plans for economic and housing growth, for agricultural production, for net zero energy investment, all recognise and are consistent with the water scarcity challenge. So it's not to say that we're never going to see any of these projects being paused, being held back because of water constraints. But at least, because our role, we think, is to support different sectors in their long-term plans to make sure they recognise the challenge and are putting in place adaptations and investments to support those water resources coming forward. So again, the list will be published when we get to the final business plan, but hopefully you can see how the vision rolls into the priorities into the measure of success, and then there's a whole suite of kind of short-term, medium-term and long-term actions which will be listed within the plan itself. In terms of the board constitution, again, general agreements that we should move away from our pay-to-play model, which involves our principal funding members being required under our Articles of Association to fund a share of our core costs. That we think that means that it means that whilst we've got good representation on our board, that model is starting to unwind as some of our previous members have had to withdraw for budgetary reasons when really they should be represented on our board. So general support for moving away from principal funding membership to essentially kind of appointing board members based on merit. But we do need that funding source to be secured before we can make that shift. And in terms of what we plan to do, we would always have our 4 water company members. We would always have agricultural interests and the association and drainage authorities represented, but we also want to make sure we've got good representation across local councils, as well as the energy sector. We've now got urban and civic, as I mentioned earlier, is on our board from a kind of developer master plan perspective. We'd also retain independent chair and 2 executive directors. So that creates a board around 15, 16 people, which we think is probably about the biggest that we'd want. We wouldn't want to kind of extend it any bigger than that because it ceases to kind of be so effective as a decision-making body. But certainly want to ensure good representation, but without necessarily being exhausted. We wouldn't want every council represented on a board. We wouldn't want every catchment partnership represented on a board, but we do absolutely want to make sure that we've got representation of sectors and geographies on the board as we do now. And then finally, around improving openness and transparency. Again, a few comments coming through about making sure that WRE as an organisation, as a membership organisation, is being as open and transparent as it can. As I say, we've already got good cross-sector representation on our board, different members representing different sectors and geographies there. We've got the strategic advisory group meetings like we've got today. Really good kind of cross-sector membership through the SAG and similar cross-sector representation on our technical delivery group, which underpins the detailed regional planning work. We publish summaries of our board meetings. We obviously send quarterly newsletters and hold these quarterly SAG meetings. What we already plan to do is publish each year going forward 2 progress reports, one in the summer focusing on delivery of the regional plan. You know, are demand management strategies on track? Are the supply side options coming through the delivery pipeline to the timescales that we need? And then a more general kind of update on multi-sector progress toward the end of the year. That's what the Environment Agency has asked us to do, and that's certainly something we would, we support and want to do. And beyond that, we also want to re-establish the agricultural agri-environment task and finish group. As we get into commissioning these multi-sector environmental destination studies, it's really important that those studies are commissioned and led and steered by a multi-sector stakeholder group, and we think the the agri-environment task and finish group is the best one to do that. We'll also include a priority and regularity statement within our annual report to the AGM. And as I mentioned earlier, against those success measures and those business plan priorities, the AGM report will include a kind of progress report against our business plan. So hopefully that just kind of strengthens our approach to open and transparency. But again, any further kind of comments on that front, anything more we think, you think we can do just let us know. And that is it, Paul. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just see if there are any questions. Tim, the business plan. Tim,
thank you, Daniel. Just from somebody that's involved in agriculture and not immersed completely in water, for your for some feedback and to help your transparency and openness, I would appreciate the explanation of what all the acronyms are. There's so many, it's very difficult to understand what all these things are. And I don't work in I don't immersed in, I mean, what the WinRIP and the DLAP, I mean, yeah, it's way above the straight in my head. I don't know what they all are. So yeah, that would, for openness and transparency, there's some feedback for you.
Yeah. Very
duly noted. Thank you, Tim.
Duly noted indeed. Thank you.
Yeah. Kelvin.
Yeah, really good meeting. I think the thing that this highlights, and I'm very focused on environmental destination, as Daniel well knows, but I think we're starting to understand, the public are really into the state of our rivers through the sewage issues. But I think the environmental destination, I think we're starting to expose the costs actually to fix the way we've managed our rivers and nicked all the water out of our rivers, and actually to fix that. Daniel's used the word and Ben has used the word several times. We're talking billions again, forget 2 reservoirs. I think we're talking of another naught on the end, to be truthful, to fix our chalk streams and our natural environment. And it's going to be really intriguing to see what measures the agency is going to come up with in AMP 9 and 10 to see, is this fixable, at what cost? Because I don't know what that's going to be, to be truthful.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you. Katie.
Thank you very much. That was really clear. When I've been looking in what's happening in the US for abstraction from groundwater abstraction and the disaster that they've gone into, but they do have a lot of mapping information about the groundwater and what's happened and what's left in the groundwater. And also they're taking some really drastic actions in place. Is it possible that we might have the same kind of level of information about our chalk aquifers to understand really visually, maybe with mapping, what is happening with the chalk aquifers? Thanks.
Yeah, there are quite a few data sets out there. I'm thinking about the water situation reports that the Environment Agency published. I think they've got details of groundwater levels as well as reservoir levels. I see Kelvin nodding. Katie, I can probably put that in the chat or email you afterwards.
Yeah, they do. It's produced on a monthly basis. It's produced by Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So if you look on the CEH Water Resource Situation Report, then and you'll also see there the trends in groundwater levels as well. Yeah. Kelvin, is that a legacy hand? Yep. Okay. No problem at all. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Another full meeting. Thank you for your participation within it. See that the date of the next meeting is our annual general meeting on the 14th of December, and the information will be is already out on that. What we are intending to do is to also launch the final regional water resource plan at that time after the AGM. So we'll have the AGM and then we'll have the launch of the regional water resources plan, as long as between now and then there aren't any winds that head us off in another direction. So we'll just have to wait and see, but that is the intent. So if you could put those dates in the diary, AGM 14th of December, then followed by the launch of the regional water resources plan. So thank you very much, and see you all again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.